Let's move on then, and Scotland and land.
Indeed. We've covered a lot on the environmental schemes that are either being put out as proposals or indeed have met reality in England and Wales. So now a focus on Scotland with the Land Reform Bill dated 14th of March 2024. And in effect, this highlights really how devolution can affect itself, which is essentially that the destination is the same, but the language used with which to get there is slightly different. So the bill here places legal responsibilities on the owners of the very largest landholdings to show how they use their land and how that use contributes to key public policy priorities, such as addressing climate change and protecting and restoring nature. These owners will also have to engage with local communities about how they use the land. So I'm not going to go too much further into the bill, which obviously is a bill at the moment. But in effect, the way that the Scots are aiming to do this is actually slightly different. And by remarkable coincidence, there is a campaign launched at almost exactly the same time by Community Land Scotland, saying that they're calling on the Scottish Government to commit to ensuring 10% of Scotland's land to be community owned by 2030. Through urgent and ambitious land reform and by working with local communities for a more just and greener Scotland. And this is their sort of recurring themes, just a few bits from their website. Scotland's for sale, but who is buying it? And then they talk about helping communities realise the benefits of community ownership. To be fair to them, on Twitter, they have highlighted some of the inconsistencies in environmental policy. They talk about that carbon offsetting undermining the need to reduce direct carbon emissions if one puts to one side the entirely flawed scientific concept there. But they make the point that allowing people who are polluting, such as Shell and Thales, to maintain business as usual and keep polluting when it means that some other activity has got to be done somewhere else to offset this is, of course, ludicrous, as is the planting of non-native trees. So this is what they're dealing with on the left on the impacts. But then I would say they perhaps overstep on the right with the what can be done, because they talk about changing how the economy works through decarbonising it, dismantling systems of injustice, encouraging wealthy individuals and corporations to buy land, plant trees with public money and profit from Scotland's extremely unequal land ownership will not solve the climate crisis, but entrench the systems that caused it. They don't qualify that exactly, but they do go on to say when communities own their own land, net zero targets, sustainability of local livelihoods and caring for biodiversity can all be centred rather than prioritising profit from the land. Well, it's interesting, of course, when one considers how the various lures being offered to English and Welsh farmers are manifesting themselves. So Scotland's issue seems to be that the vast majority of the land is in the hands of a very small number of landowners, which is something that's been a recurring theme over many years. So where has this come from? We go back to 2014, the land of Scotland and the common good. So now the language that we see here is starting to make sense in what really seems in some ways to be a sort of either communist or at least sort of communitarianist approach. Again, 2014 language. The largest private landowner in Scotland at present is Buccleuch Estates, with nearly 100,000 hectares, or just over 1% of Scotland's land area. The concern is not what an upper limit should be, but the principle that there should be an established limit. Now, that's out of date because the largest landowner in Scotland is now a Scandinavian. But nevertheless, of course, the significant detail here is that this has not come from Scotland. It's come from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organisation's voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure, and it includes the provision that states may consider land ceilings as a policy option. These guidelines are supported by, amongst others, the G20 group of states, including the UK. So we just go back a little bit further to 2012 to see exactly what we are referring to here, which, as stated, are the voluntary guidelines on responsible governance of tenure. So the idea here is really that although in the first instance this was introduced as being entirely voluntary, of course it's weaved its way into proposed legislation to suggest that it must go ahead. And indeed, it's interesting to see how government in this case seems to be working alongside a pressure group to take land away from people who are deemed to have too much of it.